Okay, so here's a trillion-dollar question. How do you go from making graphics cards for gamers to controlling the entire future of artificial intelligence? Like, how do you position yourself so perfectly that every single AI breakthrough, every robotics company, every tech giant building the future, they all have to come to you? Because that's exactly what Nvidia did. And it wasn't luck. It wasn't just good timing. It was one of the most brilliant strategic plays in tech history. Oh, and before we get into AI, let's just acknowledge the elephant in the room. They pulled this exact same trick with crypto mining. Remember when you couldn't buy a graphics card because every Bitcoin miner in the world was hoarding them? Yeah, that was Nvidia's first rehearsal for world domination. But AI was their masterpiece. And if you want to understand how one company managed to position themselves at the center of the most important technology revolution in human history, you're going to want to hit that subscribe button. Because this story is part genius and part ruthless strategy. Let's start with something most people don't know. Nvidia saw this coming. Not just AI. They saw the entire shift toward parallel computing way back in the early 2000s. While Intel was obsessing over making individual processor cores faster, Nvidia was asking a fundamentally different question. What if instead of one really smart processor, we had thousands of really simple ones? That question, that was the foundation of everything that came after. See, Jensen Huang didn't just want to make better graphics cards. He wanted to make Nvidia indispensable. And the way you make yourself indispensable isn't by making a product. It's by making an ecosystem that everyone wants to be part of. So in 2006, while everyone else was focused on the next generation of games, Nvidia did something that seemed almost boring. They released CUDA, a programming language that let people use graphics cards for non-graphic stuff. At the time, it looked like a side project, a nice-to-have feature for researchers and hobbyists. But here's what was really happening. They were building the foundation for the most successful platform strategy in modern tech. Think about it like this. If you want to become essential to an industry, you don't just make the best product. You make it so that using your product becomes the obvious choice. And the way you do that, you control the tools. CUDA wasn't just a programming language. It was a strategic investment in the future. Every researcher who learned CUDA, every algorithm that got written in CUDA, every optimization that got built for CUDA, it all made Nvidia more valuable to the entire ecosystem. They gave it away for free, which, looking back, was absolutely genius. Remember the crypto boom? When Bitcoin was going crazy and everyone was mining Ethereum? Well, guess what those miners needed? Graphics cards. Lots and lots of graphics cards. Suddenly, Nvidia had this massive new market they never expected. People were literally camping out at Best Buy to get their hands on RTX cards. The demand was so intense that they had to start making cards specifically for miners. They weren't just selling hardware. They were learning how to manage massive demand spikes. They were learning how to serve completely different use cases with the same underlying technology. They were learning how to be essential to industries they never planned to enter. When the crypto bubble burst, when all those miners suddenly didn't need graphics cards anymore, Nvidia had already positioned themselves for the next wave. They had already built the infrastructure for something much bigger, AI. So when the deep learning revolution started around 2012, Nvidia wasn't caught off guard. They were ready. They had the hardware, they had the software, they had the developer community. But most importantly, they had the vision. While everyone else was trying to figure out what this AI thing was, Nvidia was already building the foundation for the entire industry. They didn't just make AI chips. They made AI chips that worked seamlessly with a complete software stack. They made software that was optimized for their chips. They made tools that made developers more productive. It's like Apple, but for artificial intelligence. And once you experience that level of integration, everything else feels clunky, but it gets better. Because Nvidia didn't just lock in individual developers. They enabled entire industries. Want to do AI research? Every university in the world teaches CUDA, because it's the most practical way to get things done. Want to hire AI talent? They all know CUDA, because that's what they learned in school. Want to build AI products? Your entire team already knows CUDA, so why switch? They made it feel like a natural choice. Like, of course you'd use CUDA for AI. Like, of course you'd use Nvidia chips. Like it was just the best tool for the job. Honestly, in many cases it was. AMD makes chips, Intel makes chips, Google makes chips, Apple makes chips, but none of them invested 15 years in building the software ecosystem that makes those chips easy to use. Then, just when you think they couldn't get more strategic, they started expanding their scope. They didn't just want to make the chips, they wanted to optimize the entire experience. They acquired companies that made networking equipment. They acquired companies that made software tools. They acquired companies that made development frameworks. They didn't just want to be part of the AI revolution, they wanted to make the AI revolution as smooth as possible. And it worked. Today, if you want to build serious AI, you don't just buy Nvidia chips. You can buy Nvidia networking that's optimized for AI workloads. You can use Nvidia software that's optimized for AI development. You can deploy on Nvidia platforms that are optimized for AI inference. It's a complete integrated solution, and they built it while everyone else was trying to figure out what AI even was. Nvidia didn't just build a platform, they made it collaborative. They partnered with every major cloud provider. AWS, Google Cloud, Microsoft Azure, they're all running Nvidia chips, but they're also contributing to the ecosystem. They partnered with every major AI company. OpenAI, Anthropic, Meta, they're all training on Nvidia hardware, but they're also providing feedback that makes the hardware better. They made their partners invested. These companies aren't just customers, they're collaborators. They've contributed so much to Nvidia's ecosystem that they want it to succeed. They've become part of the platform. Just when you think they're done, they start expanding into robotics. Because apparently, having the best AI platform wasn't enough. They wanted to enable the physical world too. They launch Isaac, their robotics platform. They launch Omniverse, their simulation platform. They launch Jetson, their edge computing platform. They didn't just want to power the brains of robots. They wanted to make robot development as accessible as possible. And it's working. Every major robotics company is building on Nvidia platforms. Tesla, Boston Dynamics, Figure AI, they're all using Nvidia technology because it lets them focus on what they do best instead of rebuilding the entire software stack. They're not just the Intel of AI, they're becoming the platform that enables the entire robotics revolution. They're not just building a platform for technology, they're building infrastructure for the future. They're partnering with governments to build AI factories, these massive data centers that will power the next generation of AI. And they're not just providing the chips, they're providing the entire blueprint for how to build AI infrastructure at scale. Saudi Arabia, UAE, Germany, Taiwan, they're all building AI infrastructure with Nvidia technology. But they're not just buying products, they're buying into a vision of how AI infrastructure should work. Honestly, it's a pretty compelling vision. Instead of every country trying to figure out AI infrastructure from scratch, they can build on proven technology and focus on the applications that matter to them. But here's what I think is really interesting. They're not just controlling the present, they're enabling the future. When Nvidia optimizes for a particular type of AI, that makes that AI more accessible to everyone. When they optimize for certain workloads, that makes those workloads more efficient for the entire industry. When they support certain frameworks, that makes those frameworks more powerful for all developers. They're not just responding to the market, they're creating tools that let the market move faster. They're not just following innovation, they're providing the infrastructure that lets innovation happen. That's actually pretty impressive. That's how platform companies should work. Meanwhile, what's happening with the competition? They're definitely trying to catch up, and in some areas, they're succeeding. AMD is making real progress with their Instinct series, especially for certain types of workloads. Intel is building competitive chips with Gaudi. Google and Amazon are building their own chips that work really well for their specific use cases. And startups? There are some really interesting companies building specialized chips for specific AI applications. Companies like Cerebras, Grok, and Samba Nova are taking different approaches that might be better for certain use cases. It's not that competition is impossible. It's that Nvidia built such a strong foundation that competitors have to be really focused and really innovative to find their niche. Their timing was incredible, almost impossibly good. They positioned themselves for AI just as deep learning was taking off. They positioned themselves for crypto just as Bitcoin was exploding. They positioned themselves for robotics just as autonomous systems were becoming practical. Either they're incredibly lucky or they're incredibly good at reading technological trends. And given how methodically they've built their platform, I'm going with strategic brilliance. They saw the patterns before everyone else did. So where does that leave us today? Well, Nvidia has successfully positioned themselves as the essential platform for the most important technology trends of our time. They provide the hardware that powers AI. They provide the software that makes AI development accessible. They provide the platforms that make AI deployment scalable. They provide the infrastructure that makes AI applications possible. And they did it all while making it seem like they were just really good at making graphics cards. So what can we learn from this? Well, first, successful platforms aren't built overnight. They're built over decades, through strategic vision, ecosystem development, and continuous innovation. Second, the most successful companies are the ones that don't just make products. They make tools that enable entire industries. They don't just solve today's problems. They build infrastructure for tomorrow's opportunities. And third, timing matters, but preparation matters more. Nvidia was ready for AI because they had spent years building the foundation. They were ready for crypto because they had built flexible, powerful hardware. They were ready for robotics because they had built a complete development platform. Now, does this mean Nvidia has too much power? That's a fair question. When one company becomes this essential to an entire industry, it raises important questions about competition, innovation, and access. But it's also worth recognizing that they earned this position through genuine innovation, strategic thinking, and consistent execution. They didn't just luck into becoming essential. They built tools that made the entire industry more productive. The challenge now is making sure that this concentration of capability continues to benefit everyone, not just Nvidia shareholders. And that's a conversation that involves regulators, competitors, and customers working together to ensure that innovation continues to flourish. Look, whether you love Nvidia or worry about their dominance, you have to respect the strategic brilliance of what they've accomplished. They saw the future of computing before anyone else, and they built the infrastructure to make that future possible. It's one of the most impressive examples of strategic positioning in modern business history. And understanding how they did it, the long-term thinking, the ecosystem building, the continuous innovation, that's valuable whether you're building a company, investing in technology, or just trying to understand how the world works. So, if you want to understand more about how these tech platforms work, how strategic positioning creates lasting advantages, and how to spot the next big technological shift, make sure you're subscribed, because this is just the beginning of a much bigger conversation about technology, strategy, and the future. Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes the most impressive victories are the ones that make success look inevitable.